I'm Nevin Lawrence. I'm the weed scientist out of Scotts Bluff. There's four weed scientists at the University of Nebraska. Three of them do corn and soybeans, and I do everything else. That's the way I explain it. So in a normal year, I do work in corn and soybeans, but also alfalfa, dry beans, sugar beets, sunflowers, potatoes, chicory, sometimes pumpkins, a bunch of other stuff. So I'm kind of the guy that does everything else. The majority of my research, though, is really focused in dry beans and sugar beets, and also rangeland. But we kind of handle a little bit of everything. I've been at the University of Nebraska for it's my 10th year now, and I've been working on Palmer Amaranth ever since. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit as well, how that all started. Um, I've given a lot of 30-minute talks. I've given a lot of 45-minute talks. I've given a lot of hour-long talks. John Thomas told me I got an hour and a half now. So you are going to witness the longest extension presentation I've ever given. But we've got a break built in some point. So with all this time, I split my presentation into two parts. I'm going to go over general concepts of kind of Palmer Amaranth weed control, and then we're going to get into practical solutions. So I'll kind of walk you through this, and we'll kind of break into those two parts. I don't know when we're going to take the break. If you've got any questions at all, don't wait. It's a long presentation. You might have forgotten what you're going to ask. Just interrupt me. Yell at me if I don't see you. Jump up, whatever. Anytime I can come and just be interrupted. Not a problem. Okay, so just kind of general concepts. And I've gave a presentation here last year. A lot of the slides are the same. What I do is I update it based on new projects I'm doing, new data I have. But a lot of these concepts are going to be the same. So if this looks familiar, anyone that's seen me speak before, I apologize, but we'll kind of get into that. So why is Palmer Amaranth a problem? This is a survey done by Amit Jahala. He's my counterpart in Lincoln, of over 300 or 500 growers and crop consultants in Nebraska. He did this in 2015. And he asked them, what are the biggest weed control issue you have in the state? So 2015. And number one was water hemp. You kind of go down that list. And Palmer Amaranth was number 6, not even in the top 5. And to be in the top first place, that's a majority of people are saying this is number one weed. A very small amount are going to be saying it's Palmer Amaranth. So 2015, this really isn't a problem. And I'm not even talking about Southwest Nebraska. I'm talking statewide, mostly focused on Eastern Nebraska. Who cares about Palmer Amaranth? 2020, 5 years later, Palmer Amaranth is the number one weed in Nebraska. And same people being surveyed, 5-year standpoint, it's absolutely blown up. So why is Palmer Amaranth a problem? This is one of the pictures from one of my fields here. The weed control in there is actually excellent. It's really, really good. What you're seeing there is the first couple feet of the corn border where we just didn't have good coverage with this herbicide. So you see the Palmer Amaranth above the corn. It's about 6 feet tall. That's just bulk corn. We had no research in there. We just had to break up kind of the crop rotations. Inside, completely clean. And then September comes around. Right around this time of year, the corn starts drying down. The leaves don't fill in as much. The cob's filling in. A little bit of light gets into the top of the canopy. And we got Palmer Amaranth germinating in a field that had been clean the entire year. So this is an example of you've done absolutely everything you can to manage it. And we actually had pretty much a weed-free corn crop year-round. And then in September, a little bit of sunlight goes in there, and we got production. This isn't going to affect yield. It's probably going to be underneath the combine header for the most part, but we are having seed production even when we do everything right. So that's kind of one of the issues with Palmer Amaranth is just that season-long weed emergence. And even if you do everything you can, sometimes it's not enough. Palmer Amaranth's also super competitive against weeds. So corn, if you've got 8 plants per yard, that's a 90% yield loss. Soybeans, 10 plants per yard. This is season-long weed competition. So from planting to the end of the year, That's the yield loss you can expect from Palmer Amaranth. This is one of my favorite studies I've ever seen. I don't know how they did this because I don't know any grower that would let me do it here. But this is a cotton field. This is from 2008 and 2009. The picture of 2008, they planted glyphosate-resistant Palmer Amaranth in a little patch there in the cotton on a grower's field. You let them do it. They then sprayed glyphosate 3 times in the cotton field. And then they harvested the cotton. And the next year, all they did is they sprayed glyphosate again. I don't know what crop it was. It's probably corn 3 times. And then they mapped out where the Palmer is. So one little patch in 2008, and then you can see the entire field's erect the next year. So the seed production potential for Palmer Amaranth as well, if you have 1 year where a little spot in the field maybe gets picked up by the combine, you're pretty much sunk in for the next few years. Any tiny escape that gets ran through that combine can get spread out and explode. And they did this at 3 different fields too. This is just one picture, but they all look this bad. So Palmer Amaranth, where's it from? It's actually native to the United States. So it's kind of found in parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and northern Mexico. It's a desert adapted weed. There used to be this civilization. It disappeared before white people ever got to Arizona, but they lived in around Phoenix. They grew corn, dried beans, and squash from about 300 to 1500 BC, AD. And I'm kind of curious they had Palmer Amaranth. They might have been dealing with it back then. But it's from that area. It got into the cotton production in New Mexico and Texas. And then once it got the cotton production there, it got moved over all the way into the cotton belt. And that's where it kind of got known as being a weed issue. Once they had problems controlling in cotton, it just started march north. They think this happened through contaminated cotton seed. Contaminated cotton seed. So when you harvest the cotton, you have the lint. You have to pull the seed out of the lint. That seed is then fed to cattle, and that feed can go anywhere into a feedlot in North America. That manure is then spread on people's fields. They think that's how it started getting from the southwest, the southeast, and then up into the rest of the country. This map is outdated, so it has the year we found Palmer Amaranth. This was made about 3 years ago by a colleague of mine in Idaho. Well, it's now in Idaho, Washington State, Montana, and Oregon. I do not know if it's in the Northeast there with Maine, New Hampshire, those areas yet, but it is, and it's also in parts of Canada as well. So it's pretty much everywhere now. Herbicide resistance. The first case of resistances was to Treflan in cotton, 1989. 1993, we had the first ALS resistant. That'd be something like Pursuit or Raptor. Also in, I think, soybeans. And then at the same time, we had atrazine resistance in corn. 2005, glyphosate resistance. 2011, they found 2 different populations, one resistant to your PPO inhibitors, that'd be your Sharpin, your Valor. Another group that was resistant to the bleachers, your Balance, those sorts of herbicides. 2015, 2,4-D resistance. So just kind of the first 3 numbers are the same there. So you look at the 2016, they found 1 population that is resistant to the ALS inhibitors, glyphosate, the group 3s like the Treflan, the PPO inhibitors, and dual all in 1 population. So there's 1 poor farmer that had a 5-way resistant Palmer Amaranth. And then in 2020, they identified 2 different populations, one that's resistant to Liberty or glufosinate, and another one that's resistant to dicamba. So within the US, these are all the different herbicides that are resistant to Palmer Amaranth can be resistant to. Now, Palmer Amaranth's not resistant to all of these at the same time, but they can be individually resistant to all those. The bolded ones are what is found in eastern Nebraska. So within eastern Nebraska, we've got the group 27, group 14, group 9, group 5, and group 2 resistances. multiple resistances in Nebraska. We have group 2 and 9. That's the ALS inhibitors and glyphosate. We've got that plus atrazine resistance. And then we also have another population that is resistant to atrazine and then the bleaching herbicides. Within Western Nebraska, as far as I'm currently aware, we're only dealing with the group 2 or the ALS inhibitors. That'd be your Raptor, your Pursuit, your Permit, and then the group 9 or glyphosate resistance. So we're kind of lucky in that standpoint that we're not dealing with what the rest of the country is dealing with. But it just takes one bad shipment of contaminated, manure for that to change. So kind of summarize this, why is Palmer amaranth a problem? And this is the case for every weed, but they're adaptive to disturbance. What we do in a farming field is we disturb the environment every time we plant and harvest. They're good at that. It's quite drought resistant because it's from a desert environment. It does not need a lot of moisture to get going, and it's great at doing hot weather and low moisture. It's season-long weed emergence. It produces a ton of seeds, and it's great at adapting to herbicides. So all those things put together, and we've kind of got like the perfect weed to have to deal with. All right, so I'm going to go on now to my guaranteed solution to manage Palmer amaranth. Works all the time. So going back to this little graph here, 1993, we've got the ALS resistance in soybeans. We've got the atrazine resistance in corn. The next resistance we see is in 2005, and that is to glyphosate. So what happened between 1993 and 2005? Anyone know? Yeah, first Roundup Ready crop, 1996. I think it was soybeans. 1997, the corn comes out. So what happens is glyphosate comes out, and then within 10 years, we've got resistance to it. So you're corn soybean farmer, and glyphosate's not working. What's the next thing you're going to use? And we already have the atrazine resistance and the ALS resistance. Well, in corn, I'd probably use a bleacher, group 27. And if I was in soybeans, we got the PPO inhibitors. We've got our Cobra, our Ultra Blazer, our Reflex, those sorts of things. So I'd go ahead and use those next. And well, that's the next thing that's resistant. Once those are resistant, what do we have next? We've got 2,4-D, we've got dicamba, and we got glufosinate. So what is happening is once resistance shows up, we're moving to the next best option. And then that becomes resistant. We go to the next best option. So we're always just kind of one step ahead of where the Palmer amaranth is as far as resistance goes. So when resistance occurs, farmers move on to the next best herbicide. This really only works in the short term. So there was a survey of 106 farms in Illinois in 2016, and they asked them for a whole bunch of information on what practices they were doing, and then are you dealing with herbicide-resistant weeds and which ones? And that was kind of how the way that worked. And they found 3 relevant results. One of them is distance to resistant field was not important. So that meant if one farmer had resistance and another one didn't, it didn't matter if they're next to each other. If the farmer that didn't have resistance was doing everything right, his neighbor could be having just the worst train wreck imaginable. It wouldn't matter as long as he was doing the right practices. So as long as you're doing the right thing to manage your weeds, you can't really blame your neighbor based on this research. The second thing is, and this is kind of an old concept in weed science, but it gets repeated, is originally they recommend doing this thing called rotating herbicides, where if you're, let's say, a corn soybean farmer, you grow Roundup Ready corn one year and Liberty Link soybean the next year, and that would help with your weeds. It doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is if you have some Palmer amaranth that gets resistant to glyphosate in your first year, and then you go to Liberty Leak soybeans next year, that's going to control some of the Palmer amaranth, but a lot of that's still going to be in the seed. And when you come back to the Roundup Ready that third year, it's going to blow up. So rotating herbicides actually increase the likelihood that you have a resistant weed. So that's a practice that doesn't work. Deliberately rotating different herbicide modes of action doesn't work. What they did find, though, is mixing herbicides of different modes of action together decreased the likelihood of resistance. So using the next best herbicide doesn't work, but applying two effective modes of action, so two herbicides that are effective modes of action at the same time, reduce the likelihood of resistance by 83 times. Not 83%, 83 times. If you could use 3 effective modes of action, that reduced the likelihood of resistance by 140 times. That is to the point where you're not going to get resistance. So using multiple herbicides is a long-term solution. So my guaranteed solution to herbicide resistance, just use 3 effective mode of action every single time you spray your herbicide. You'll never have to worry about resistance. Guaranteed. That's all you got to do. So here's a little chart I came up with. It's assuming that we have ALS and glyphosate-resistant Palmer Amaranth. What doesn't work? Well, ALS herbicides don't work, and glyphosate doesn't work. In dry beans, Pursuit, Varisto, Raptor, Basigram, Permit, those don't work. If you're growing sugar beets, glyphosate upbeat doesn't work. So what does work? Well, in corn, we see a lot of different things. We got the group 15s. I have acronym on there. I'll tell you why. Atrazine, we got the group 27s. We got Sharpen. We got Dicamba. We actually got a ton of options if we're going corn on corn on corn. And so this idea that use 3 different modes of action at the same time, it's going to take care of your resistances. This is actually possible in corn right now in our area. So, for example, let's say we have glyphosate-resistant Palmer Amaranth, and you're spraying Banville plus generic glyphosate, real cheap treatment. That's not going to work because that Dicamba or that Banville is 1 effective mode herbicide. You have to spray 2. So it's doing something like Banville plus atrazine. Those are 2 effective herbicides. Same time, for the Palmer Amaranth to survive that, it would have to simultaneously be resistant to both those herbicides. That's what makes this a really good treatment. So another product, something like Diflex Duo, which is tebutrione, it's a group 27, plus Dicamba mixed together. That's an effective 2 modes of action. You do 3, you're even better off. So that's something like Diflex Duo plus your atrazine. Or Acuron has 3 effective modes of action already in the same package. That's going to prevent your resistance. So there we are. That's the solution. But if you look at corn before dry beans, we see that the group 27s get taken off the list because most of them because of rotation restrictions, and we can't use atrazine. But we can still use Acuron. We still have the group 14s. We don't have Dicamba. If you're a sugar beet grower, we see the Acuron's gone. Those group 14s are also gone now, or the Acuron's now gone. So now we're down to the group 14s, Dicamba, group 15s. Move on to dry beans, and we see that we have really good pre-options, but we have nothing post. So what I was suggesting with multiple modes of action, it does work if you can get away with it. But in a lot of our crops, we just don't have even 1 effective mode of action. And I'm kind of getting you somewhere to kind of look at that corn year and what you're going to do during that. But what we're seeing is, and I make this point all the time to my colleagues back in Eastern Nebraska, our resistances here aren't as bad, but we have far less options. We have way less options in dry beans than they have in soybeans. And because of our rotation restrictions and our soil types, we also lose a lot of our corn options as well. Okay, so there's my solution that doesn't work, but it kind of works if you're in corn. So I'm going to move on now to, and this doesn't work for dry beans, alfalfa, sugar beet, sunflower, and many other crops we grow here. Yes? I'll get to that. The label got changed to where you kind of can spray it, but you kind of can't. So just show of hands, anyone use reflex and dry beans? Okay, anyone had carryover to your corn and reflex and dry beans? Okay, so hands for both of those. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So kind of what I was just saying, using multiple modes of action does work. It's very effective. It just costs a lot more money, and it doesn't work for a lot of our crops. So now I'm going to talk about something called DEI. Who here has heard of DEI? Any hands? Good. I made this up Tuesday. So DEI stands for diversify herbicides, expand the timeline, and integrate strategies. So what I'm talking about, diversify herbicides. So we need to use multiple effective modes of action to prevent resistance. We absolutely need to do that, unless you can't do that. And we can't do that in dry beans. But I talk about expanding the timeline, and what I mean here is if you're just focusing on that 1 year of your dry beans, you're missing a lot of opportunities here to actually get palmer amaranth under control. And I know not everyone has a fixed rotation. A lot of times you might be moving to rented ground. You can't control what's put out the year before. But if you do have control over what's thrown in the rotation, you should be thinking of your corn crop or your small grain crop or crops where we have options as a way to help reduce the seed bank leading up to the crops like dryable beans where we don't have the options. So you're going to want to set up that crop for the best chance of success and really think about expanding herbicide choice and selection leading up to those years. And then integrate strategies. Anything we can do kind of helps. So herbicides help. Using your rotation strategically helps. Tillage helps, and I'll get into that a little bit. Cover crops can help, and I'll get into that as well. So the more things we can do, the more pressure we take off of the herbicide resistance. So I'm going to provide an example now of from another weed, kochia, that is kind of explains how to kind of merge all these together. A project that we did. I don't have a great example of this for palmer amaranth yet because this was kind of a rare project we did that required a ton of funding from the USDA in kochia, and we're just looking for an opportunity to do with palmer amaranth. But this is a map of the field study, and it's going to get complicated. The top part of the map that has the squiggly lines, and then there's the bottom part that doesn't. The top part stands for intensive tillage. We tilled this every year. The bottom part stands for minimum tillage. We didn't till it all. But we did have sugar beets in the rotation, and we move a lot of dirt, harvest some sugar beets. I wouldn't call it a no-till, but it was basically no tillage at all. Then we got those lines: the C, the CS, the CBS, the CBS, G, and S. So the C stands for corn. So it was 4 years continuous corn. The S stands for sugar beets. It was corn, sugar beet, corn, sugar beet. So 4 years. The CDS was corn, dryable beans, sugar beet, and then the blue one over there is corn, dryable beans, sugar beet, small grain. And this is a 4-year study. The way we actually did this is each location site had 4 replications. So we replicated each treatment 4 times. They all started in a different year of the rotation. So when I show you data from like what a small grain did in this rotation, that's averaging 4 different replications where each year was in a different year of the rotation. So we didn't set it up in a certain way. So we got 2 levels of tillage, 4 levels of crop rotation, and then we got these, and then to kind of explain the concept behind this. This is focused on kochia. Kochia comes up at a time that either spring wheat is either emerging, so we compete with it, or the winter wheat's already up. Kochia also is done emerging usually by the time we plant dryable beans, so that's another option to kind of get ahead of it. But with sugar beets and corn, the kochia already kind of has a head start over those 2 crops.
When we talk about seed production, the wheat and the dry beans are usually harvested before we get the peak of kochia seed production. So if we can get those two crops from the rotation, our suspicion was it's going to, even if we can't control the weed, we should be able to harvest the crop before the seed production occurs. But then again, the corn and the sugar beets, we're going to have a lot of seeds left over in those fields. So these rotations are targeting all kochia. And then we got these other things in here. Gets even more complicated. The O stands for only using one herbicide, and that herbicide was an ALS herbicide. So that'd be something like upbeat in sugar beets or Raptor in dry beans. The kochia is ALS resistant. So those O's, for 4 years, we used an herbicide that didn't work. The R stands for rotation. We went 1 year using an herbicide that didn't work. We went the next year using an herbicide that did work. And then the M stands for mix. All 4 years, we used an herbicide that works, herbicide that didn't work. And for this study, the kochia was not glyphosate resistant yet. After the study was over, it did become glyphosate resistant. During the time of the study, it was only resistant to ALS and herbicides. Okay, that's locked over. We planted about 100 seeds per plot, and then we just let the study go. And we actually collected seeds from the whole study. We collected soil samples. We had to count how many kochia germinated. It was a lot of work. So this is the last year of the study. This is the satellite, or not satellite, this is a drone image of the study. I'm going to kind of walk you through what it looks like. Those two kind of purple boxes, the one on the left is the minimum tillage, the one on the right is intensive tillage. You can't tell what's going on there because it's in the corn, and the kochia is smaller than the corn, just looks like corn. But that's continuous corn, that's the corn sugar beet, that's the corn sugar beet, corn sugar beet dry beans, and the bottom one is corn sugar beet dry beans small grains. And as I said, each replication was in a different year of rotation. So those two plots there are in the continuous corn part of it. Moving over here, this is in the sugar beet year, and this is actually the most interesting one. The top one is continuous corn. Here is the corn sugar beet. Here is the corn sugar beet dry beans, and then here's where we got the small grain net. You can see how much kochia is in that study. That's the dark green. The light green is the is where the sugar beets are. So where you can see that bottom third of the plot is clean. That's where we had the mixture herbicide. We used herbicide that actually worked with the herbicide that didn't work. The other ones are either the rotation or only using herbicide that doesn't work. Moving over here, this is the dry bean year, and then moving over here, that's the small grain year. So the wheat's already been harvested, and there's just no kochia in there. Okay, this is kind of what our check plot looked like. It was the do nothing treatment, minimum tillage, continuous corn, only using herbicide doesn't work, and you can see a ton of kochia in there, quite a bit. So what worked? We see from this numbers, the 2,400, the 4,300, that's the number of seeds that germinated in the greenhouse from a square yard of soil. So we're seeing from the intensive tillage, averaged over all herbicides, averaged over every crop, we're seeing a reduction in about 56% of the seeds by using tillage. When we added sugar beets to rotation, no surprise there. Kochia control got worse. The dry beans actually improved it relative to the sugar beet rotation, but it just kind of brought it back to where the continuous corn was. But for having 1 year of wheat in the rotation, we saw a 33% reduction in seeds. And then the rotation herbicide versus only using herbicide that doesn't work, no difference. But when we use an herbicide that worked for 4 years, 82% reduction in kochia. So all that's not too surprising or groundbreaking. But when we look at all these put together, what do we get? There's our kind of control plot. 4 years of an herbicide that doesn't work, continuous corn, only using and then no tillage, that's 12,000 seeds per square yard. Some of the treatments actually increase the number of seeds that were seen in there. But we find that 3 treatments had greater than a 95% reduction in kochia seed. And that was, they were all using an herbicide that worked all 4 years. But it was continuous corn with intensive tillage, and then also the 4-year rotation with intensive tillage, and then the 4-year rotation with minimum tillage. So what we're seeing is herbicides alone were not getting us weed control. We had to do something else, either a very complex rotation, or we had to use tillage, or we had to do both. And so this is what I mean by kind of looking at a longer timeline for herbicide use, setting up our rotations to kind of help us battle the weed. And then also we might see a benefit too from using from tillage in some systems. And with that, any questions before I move on to the research? This is the problem. Is these are small plots. We don't have a small disc, although I'm going to buy one this year. All we had that fit in there was a rotavator, so it was very intensive tillage. But I think that wouldn't have been very much different from like a field, just a general field cultivator. It probably would have done the same thing for that setup.
Not very deep then. How deep are you on?
Oh, probably 4 inches. Not deep at all. Where are we on time, John?
10:50.
10:50.
10 minutes, still got it.
Okay, we'll see if I can go. I'll go through a couple. Just raise your hand when we're at 11. We'll follow break then. Okay, so again, I had 10 years of research. So I've been here since 2000 and 2016. And when I first started, I started in January. I actually wrote a bunch of grants before I got started to the Driving Commission, Western Sugar, other places before I ever started my position. And they were all focused on kochia management. I thought that'd be the major lead I was going to be working on. And then my first year here, all my kochia projects turned into surprise Palmer projects. And so I'm going to kind of just go over my first one that I worked on. And I'll go into a bit detail on that, but I'm going to cover yield impacts and seed production, lay-by options, what pre-programs are best, soybean posts for dry beans, corn herbicide programs, cover crops, and then a fancy robot. So this is the first study that I kind of did looking at kochia. What I got there as looking if we delayed dry bean planting by a couple of weeks, was that improving kochia control because we're going to get out of the kochia germination window. And what ended up happening was that just turned into a huge mess of Palmer. And there wasn't really any difference from delaying the dry bean planting. So we've got the different colors there are early and late. And I've got yield in 100 weight per acre. That yield basically means Palmer. The lower the yield, the more Palmer. There was a ton of Palmer in here. So this project kind of gave me some preliminary ideas of where to go to next, but it wasn't really the intent of it. So wanting to point out, we got the non-treated on the left. The next one over was a post only. Then we had Trowel and Outlook, pre-EPCAM Sunland PPI. Those two repeated, but now with the post program. And then we had a handed check. And what we're seeing here is the hand-weeded check was comparable to using these full pre or PPI programs together, but we weren't seeing great control with the Raptor Bassigram. And that's because Raptor's it's resistant to Raptor. It's not resistant to Bassigram, just Bassigram never worked with the pigweeds to begin with. And we saw very similar things in 2018, where we are seeing failures in a lot of these herbicides, and including this one here. The price is not doing great. And neither is the Raptor Bassigram, but we are seeing, and I'll get back to this later on, pretty good control with the EPCAM Sunland relative to the hand-weeded check compared to the Prowl Outlook. And so that was kind of one of our first studies that gave us kind of a window on what we needed to do. But from this study, it was clear the Palmer Amaranth was definitely going to be an issue for the Panhandle in Southwest Nebraska, where we're dealing with a lot of drywood beans. And so the first thing we did after this, specific to Palmer, was try to figure out what the yield impacts are.
Yeah, so one question.
Yeah.
If rapid basket doesn't work, why are you go better doing that with your index on?
We did remove a little bit of lamb's quarter. That so it wasn't all Palmer. There's a little bit in there. Also, the big reason at this point in time, about half the population was not resistant.
Geographic.
Correct.
Okay.
And then that quickly changed.
So you're getting some control with that.
Yeah, and actually, when this isn't really relevant to the dry beans, but for my sugar beet research, from 2016 to 2020, glyphosate worked, and it was awesome because I could have a plot with sugar beets where I'd spray glyphosate and take out all the Palmer, and it was really good for research because I have a weed-free control that I didn't have to do any work for. And then 2021, I managed a 20-acre field. That entire 20 acres was resistant the next year. And I also have Hosha that is glyphosate resistant, and it's in patches. I know what parts of the field are resistant, which parts are not. And I can kind of know where the study is if I'm going to be dealing with that. And that's been that way for a while. It's stable. It doesn't move really. The Palmer, the entire field, just overnight resistant. It was the craziest thing we saw. So the big reason, there was a little bit of lamb's quarter in there, but the biggest reason is it was kind of what we call a segregating population. Some of it was resistant to the raptor, some of it wasn't. This is, if I repeated this year, that raptor basket would not be on the aisle.
Are these beans are regrowing?
These are all pintos. For my, and I'm gonna have, if I don't mention the variety, and I will be mentioning the variety in some of these trials, I use upright pintos, and I use upright pintos because I'm trying to get as much space, sunlight coming between the rows as possible to make them weedier.
On 30s?
On 22s, we're on 22s.
What's the funny day? What's standard? What's the
Standard would have been, we would have gone about right around the first week of June. I think this is June 3rd. And then late would have been 14 days later.
when you think the difference in yield from standard to late is just weed control?
So the way to look at that is that the handed a check where we kept the study completely weed free the entire year. If you're seeing a difference in the standard to late, then there's a little bit of planting date going on there. But if they're the same, and these are, so if the bars overlap, they're the same statistically, there was no effect of planting date on the yield. So what we are seeing when we are seeing separation, it's going to be some weed control. So that was so in some of these situations, depending on the herbicide we're using, we are seeing a little bit of difference based on planting date, but it wasn't super consistent. Good question, thank you. Okay, so yield impacts, already went over this. That's what we have for corn and soybeans. It's a very standard way we do these trials. So we repeated the same thing in dry beans. Top left, weed free, middle, 2 plants for 10 yards, 3 plants for 10 yards, 1 plant for 2 yards, 1 plant per yard, 2 plants for 2 yards. Ton of work. We had to go out there every 3 times a week and pull in and pull what came up. But we kept the density going, did this for 2 years. This is the yield reduction curve. We draw a curve to kind of fit the model. We see where it falls. Where, I can't see where I'm pointing, but that black line going across, that's at where a 5% yield impact is. The reason I have that's what we kind of just made up and call the economic threshold. So I say lower, we'll start to notice a yield decline over an entire field at 5% yield reduction. Anything below that, 2, 3, 4%, that's going to be hard to pick up. But that 5% yield reduction is kind of the threshold for when that economic impact happens. And we're showing that at 4 plants per 1,000 square feet. That's where we're estimating this for drywood beets. And to put this in perspective, the other 2 things we talked about, corn, soybeans, dry beans, 78% yield loss from 2 plants per yard. So
far, far, far more susceptible to palmer interference than either corn or soybeans. We did the same study just to kind of throw this out there in sugar beets, and it's pretty similar. 90% yield loss for one plant per foot. The 2 plants per yard, that's 1 plant per foot and a half. So they're pretty close in number, actually. The sugar beets are a bit more susceptible, but the dry beans are right in there. So both these crops are just very, very susceptible to palmer amaranth. We also looked at seed production, and what we found, the density doesn't really matter. And when we had 1 plant per 10 feet of row, they were putting out like 500,000 seeds per plant. And then when you got down to like the high densities, they were putting out a lot less, but it kind of averaged out. You let the palmer plant grow all season long. Every square yard was putting out about 300,000 seeds is what we were seeing. So the seed input was huge, but it was about the same across all of them. Okay. So there's our yield reduction. Let's talk about weed control. So what did I look into? So kind of where we're at right now, pre and PPI options actually do work really good. We can control palmer amaranth with our PPI options. We can control with our pre options. The problem is after about 3 or 4 weeks, they stop working, and then you have palmer amaranth come up again. And so what we have, the only product we have is Reflex. And so Reflex, the way it used to be labeled is you apply it in dry beets. It had to be under a pivot. You had to have a combined 30 inches of precipitation or irrigation between then and corn planting, and it was a 10-month rotation restriction. What happened is they were seeing carryover to, I think, mostly popcorn, but I think also a little bit of field corn in southwest Nebraska. And Syngenta moved that to be a 18-month rotation interval to corn. So now, according to the label, you have to wait 18 months to plant corn after your dry beets. And there's a little bit of an asterisk on the label. So what they say is if you do a field bioassay, you can plant early. And so what's a field bioassay? That means you take your corn planter, you make strips across the field, you let your corn come up. If you're not seeing injury, you're good to go. You plant the rest of the field. Who is going to do that? You're going to have to buy one variety of seed that's a bit longer day maturity, plant that, wait 2 weeks, see if you have it, come in with a shorter maturity group, plant the rest of your field. No one does that. And so what that label says is if you don't see injury, you can plant. If you do see injury, you didn't do the field bioassay, so we're not live. And so it basically gets them out of any injury for that. And the problem is, dry beans are often going the next year to corn, or if they go to small grains, it's a 4-month rotation restriction. And so, it's just doesn't fit now with the label. And so you can still use it, but you're reliable in case you see injury in your form. So that really is the only post we have labeled right now. It does work. I'll get into a bit more detail about how well it works, but it does have activity on palmer amaranth for sure. So the only other option is a lay-by application of Outlook or Dual. And this is kind of the next step I did in my research was to try to figure out how best to use these. Where are we at?
This would be a good break time.
We're going to stop here, and then we're going to jump into lay-by applications, Outlook, and Dual.